They throw around the word pioneer, like it's like we don't even know what the word pioneer means anymore. For us, it's people going over in a wagon. But like my kids, they were shocked to find out that I had a coffee cup from 1998, right? Because my kids are 12 and 14. So they're like, it's that old. Well, today we have a pioneer. And I'm not talking about the age, but when you find out what Anne Montgomery pioneered, you're going to be amazed. And then when you start finding out how many things this woman has done and is still doing, you'll be tired like I am. Anne Montgomery, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me, Gary. I appreciate it. And my definition of pioneer is old.
Well, you were one of the first, right? And
Yeah.
now, one of the things about Anne, and you're sitting back and if you're of a certain age, you're going, why does she look familiar to me? Because if you were in the early days of watching ESPN, you knew who Anne Montgomery was. Anne Montgomery was one of the few female sports anchors. Heck, they didn't have a lot of sports anchors on ESPN when they started. I was trying to explain this to my son today, and he's like, "So what would they do? Would they have Larry Bird?" And I'm like, "Buddy, no, they had like obscure minor league Australian rules football games,
Truck and tractor pulls. Come on."
Exactly. The stuff it was kind of jokeish, and rarely could they afford highlights, so they would tell you the Brewers beat the Twins.
Well, when I was there, we did. I was there 10 years after they started. So I was there 90 to 92. And they had just signed their first big time contract, and it was Major League Baseball. So,
Well, now,
yeah.
but you just had, I want to get into all your training. We ESPN, and listen, if you think that's going to be the whole basis of our conversation, you're wrong right now. We're going to cover it because I find it fascinating. But once you find out everything else about her, I'll be shocked if you remember ESPN at the end of this conversation. How's that? How's that for a tease? But I just wanted to cover a little bit of background. So you born in New Jersey?
No, I was born in Michigan.
Michigan?
But
Wow.
I spent I moved there New Jersey when I was 2. So I'm a Jersey girl. I claim it. I could walk to the end of my street when I was 15, get on a bus and be in Manhattan in 15 minutes, or in 35 minutes, 40 minutes. And I thought all kids had that. I thought all kids had Broadway and the Museum of Natural History and Little Italy. I thought that was normal. And when I went to college at Miami of Ohio, and my friend said, let's go to the city, and they took me to Cincinnati, I was like, where's the city? What are you talking? I didn't mean to offend anyone from Cincinnati there, but yeah, I'm a Jersey girl.
They're way too busy putting sugar in their chili. It's okay.
Oh God, stop.
Is that the worst stuff ever? That is the worst stuff ever. I remember a friend of mine said, "Oh, we're having Cincinnati chili tonight, and we're having a Cincinnati chili party." And I'm like, "Here's how sheltered I am. I've never been to New York City."
I'm sorry. 2 or 3 days of it is great, but I moved away so many years ago. In TV, you move a lot. And so I've lived in like 8 states and now another territory because I live in the Virgin Islands. So you move a lot. I haven't lived in Jersey for 50 years. So, but I do remember it fondly, and people make fun of it. They're like, oh, it's all concrete. I'm like, hell no. I learned to ski in New Jersey. We had the shore. We had, again, New York. And I defend New Jersey all the time. I grew up in woods and streams and brooks and, nature. And it was New Jersey, and nobody believes me. So I will defend New Jersey till I'm dead.
Well, we all take the stereotype, and that's what we run with. Right. And so for me, the stereotype of Cincinnati is chili with spaghetti noodles and sugar. That's wrong. I don't care what level. I mean, who hurt you? That's what I want to know. When did that become like? But we do that, right? It's like I'm from the South. I'm the same thing. I've been in broadcasting. I've lived in a lot of cities, probably not as many as you have, but a lot of cities. I've known guys and women who've lived in 30, 40 cities.
Oh, I haven't done that many, but I've moved a lot, and I appreciate different parts of the country. Let's say that.
Why Miami of Ohio?
My parents were both college graduates, which was unheard of, that my mother had a college degree. My mother was a reporter, by the way, in the 1940s. She was a freak. And she was a bitter woman, died at like almost 99. But, today my mother would never marry, never have kids. She'd be a Supreme Court justice or a governor or something. But no, she was a reporter. And the irony is she did not want me to be a sports reporter. When she came to me and she goes, "We have to pick a college. What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I went, "I want to be a sportscaster." And she said, "Don't be absurd. Don't be ridiculous. I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you." And I'm like, "I want to be a sportscaster." Had I understood there weren't any women sportscasters at that time, for the most part, I maybe wouldn't have been so stubborn about it. But I thought, my mother was a reporter. What's she so angry about? She would have been happy if I wanted to be Jane Pauley.
Yeah.
But the sports thing, she never got. She understood, participating, like she made me take golf lessons that humiliated me. I had to have a 9-iron over my bicycle when I was like 10. Hated it, hated golf, covered so many golf tournaments, hated them all. No offense to the golfers. But yeah, she never understood rooting for your team or being on a team. She didn't understand any of that.
Isn't it amazing how many people, follow down their parents' footsteps, but you find the same amount of people who veer away, right? That aren't that. I remember I had a lady who was in her 90s when my wife was pregnant with her first child, and she looked at me and she goes, "Here's the thing you need to remember: they're not a mini you. They're not you.
Yeah.
They are them, and they will obey." And I just find it fascinating that you can see, just in the short little history I have of you, of your mother, I can see her streak in you,
Oh,
right?
yeah, I
But
know. And
but
I
you
know
didn't
I'm
go
like
that
her.
route.
I know. And the irony is my dad, who fought in World War II in the Navy, became an engineer. They both went to Penn State. I mean, literally, I was the only kid that had parents with college degrees, both of them. And yet in my dad's 90s, he looked at me one day and he said, "I wish I'd been a reporter." Like, okay, Dad. And my brother was a reporter. So somehow it's probably DNA-ish. I don't know.
Well, it's just that extreme curiosity. And people think they're
Yes.
curious, but you're not really. Most people really aren't curious. That's what I found in my life.
Yes, and I
That
got that gene. I got the curiosity gene, and I'm so grateful because curiosity makes life so fascinating. I want to know answers to everything all the time, and I want to try new things and do new things. And honestly, when you get to retirement, because I'm retired from everything but being an author now, if I wasn't curious about things, I'd be bored to tears. So I think reporters do get that curiosity gene, and I wish I could give. I was a teacher for 20 years. And I wish I could have given it to a lot of my students who I'd say, 10 years, let's get you ready. What do you want to be in 10 years? Let me help you get there. And I said, "What are you interested in?" They'd go, "Nothing." I'm like, "What do you mean nothing? Come on." So yeah, I'm happy. I would like to have a T-shirt that says "I am curious." I think that'd be great.
it is, and mean it. Like I said, if people can really buy in, my kids make fun of me all the time because if you give the TV to me and I'm just going to watch, I'm most likely going to watch some documentary. It's going to bore you to
Yeah,
tears,
yeah.
right? And my son was asking me. We just had this conversation. I'm talking just a matter of days ago. He goes, why do you watch that? And I said, I love to learn, son. I
Exactly.
love to learn. I love to figure it. I want to know how they built this ancient structure. I want to know what the weather's like on Venus. I do, you know?
Yeah,
And
I don't know
and
how. I don't know. I don't know if you can develop it, or that those of us who have it just should be grateful. I have no idea.
well, and the fact that information is at our fingertips. You and I grew up, and I feel like you're the same way. I literally, because there was nothing to do, I read the encyclopedia. I read the encyclopedia because there was nothing else to do, which gave me I think it really helped as far as just assimilating knowledge. Uh, but now knowledge is at your fingertips. We fact check every second,
Well,
you
some of
know?
us do.
Well, but I mean,
I'm
all
not
of us,
going there
right?
though. That's okay.
Oh, no, but I'm just saying, if somebody sits back and goes, the number one leading cause of death amongst women age 24 is, and if you go drowning, they go, hold on. And I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying we're all willing to fact check because we can each other
Well,
now.
and as reporters and media people, that sort of was our job. So that's, you have to. Anytime I hear people say something, I'm like, is that, they said, they'll make a statement. And I'll go, is that true? How do you know? Where'd you get it from? What was your source? Do you have 3 sources to prove that? So yeah,
And
maybe we're a
see,
little warped. I don't know.
Okay, but the sports thing, were you always, because you told us of your horror stories with golf, and I'm a golfer, and it doesn't bother me at all. It embarrasses me every time I play. But where did that come from? Because as you just said, there wasn't this thing of your parents going, "Yay, team, yay."
Well, here's the thing. I was before Title IX. When I was in high school, Title IX was first implemented, but it didn't get down to us yet. So I didn't have a lot. There were teams in my school, but I didn't play on a team. I was an ice skater. And if you've ever been around real, ice skaters, they're little tiny people. I'm like 5'7". I weighed like 150 pounds, way too big to be an ice skater. I was an ice dancer. I had no talent, none. But as every person who's ever participated in a sport, I believed I could get a gold medal in the Olympics, at like 14, which was absurd. Like every kid who plays baseball, they're going to make the major leagues. Every kid who plays football is going to be a quarterback in the NFL. This is just kind of built in when you're a kid. So I had that desire. I had that desire to achieve in sports. And again, I wasn't very good, but I didn't compete, but I had to test in front of judges where I failed miserably a lot of times. But I learned competition in that way. Ironically, I should have been a swimmer. That's the best thing I am even today. And but stupid me, stupid girl, what they do to girls. I didn't want anyone to see me in a bathing suit, right? How sad. That's one regret I have, that I didn't try out for the swim team. Also, you had to get up at like 4:00 in the morning. I'm not doing that. I still hate mornings. When I was a teacher, I was as miserable as my students first period. Like, I hate the morning. So in any case, I did have that. I want to be an athlete. And on the same time, I grew up in a rink. So I grew up around ice hockey, and I loved hockey. Today, I'd play hockey. Today, I could, they'd let me now, but they
Yeah.
wouldn't back then. So I was the statistician for my school's hockey team. And so I loved ice hockey. It's really the only sport I knew. And for me to think I could be a sportscaster just knowing hockey was absurd. So when I was in high school, we had what's called the broadcast crew. And for half an hour every morning, we did a radio show. And we would read announcements, and we played music. And it was just a thing we did every day. It was an actual class for me. So one day, one of the hockey players handed me an announcement for the hockey team. He said, "Would you have them read this on this show this morning?" Sure. So I went into the class, and there was a basket with all the announcements. And I went, usually we tried to keep similar announcements together. And I pulled every sports story out of that basket. And it's about 5 minutes before the show starts, and I've got all my stories. And the guys go, and I'm like one of two girls. I might have been the only girl at that point. And they said, "Well, you got all the sports stories." I said, "Yeah, I'm going to read the sports this morning." And they said, "You can't. You're a girl. Girls can't read sports." And then the teacher came in and goes, "Quit fighting. We got 5 minutes to get on the air. If anyone wants to read the sports, she can." And so I did. And the guys were pissed. And the next day, I grabbed all the sports stories again. And they couldn't stop me. So they decided to humiliate me. And they gave me theme music. They gave me the theme music to Mission Impossible. Dun, 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 you know that? And
Mhm.
and then they started calling me Big Ann with the sports. They thought that would offend me. I loved it. And all of a sudden, coaches and players and people were handing me sports stories throughout the school day. And so I became the sportscaster. And so when my mother asked me that question, it was like, yeah, I want to be a sportscaster. I really do. And no one understood. And then I went to college, same thing. They said, "You will never, ever be a sportscaster. You're a woman." And yet my senior year, they said, "Would you like to co-host a sports show?" It was on PBS. I'm like, yeah, sure. So here we are. I'm co-hosting with a male co-host. And they said, "Okay, you got to do sports stories." Well, unfortunately, the football coach, the baseball coach, and the basketball coach all refused to speak to me. They wouldn't sit, they refused to be interviewed. And so I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? Well, then I had this little light bulb went off in my head that there are other teams on campus. There's wrestling and archery and hockey and swimming and gymnastics and all these teams no one ever pays attention to. I interviewed them. They were thrilled. There were kids that never got any notice. And so I did that, but this was a recorded show. It wasn't live. And then I graduated from college, moved to Washington, D.C., where I worked in a bar in Georgetown in the 1980s. Great fun. Really wasn't sure I wanted a real job. My parents were horrified. They said, "We put you through college so you could be a waitress." I'm like, "No, yes, but no, I'll have a plan." And sort of accidentally, I went to a Washington Capitals game one night with my aunt, who was more like a sister. And she brought a guy with her, and he was an amateur ice hockey official, like for kids. And he was bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough officials for kids, just like today. There are not enough officials. And my aunt goes, "Oh, Annie can skate." She goes, "Why don't you be a referee?" And I went, "Okay, fine." Never considering that I had never been on hockey skates in my life. I grew up on figure skates. Now, do you know the difference between hockey
No,
skates?
I don't do anything that involves propulsion on my feet. I don't
Okay.
skate. I don't ski.
There's a huge difference. And I didn't notice it until the morning I went to do my first game. And have you seen like 5 and 6-year-old hockey players? You know, the little
Yeah.
tiny ones? And their little jerseys are at their ankles and they have little sawed-off sticks and their hats, their helmets are crooked because they're too big. This was my game. And I put on those skates and I went out to take my first face-off and I fell. I fell because hockey skates do not have toe picks. Toe picks are for lazy skaters like me. You know, for real skaters, they help you land jumps and take off and do that kind of thing. But for me, if I fell, I dug them into the ice and hopped right back up. Well, hockey skates are round on the toes, toe pick area. And I dug that skate blade into the ice and I fell again. And I'm lying on the ice and all these little kids are staring down at me like, what's wrong with the ref? And I don't remember anything else about that game. But I do remember driving home from that game. And I realized that I didn't know enough to be a sportscaster. I didn't know enough about any games. Now, I'd had to go through a class. I had to take an exam. I had to go through meet other referees, that kind of thing. And I realized I just didn't know enough. So I decided to take 5 years, and I was going to officiate football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball at the amateur level. And that if I did that, somewhere in the country, there would be a forward-thinking news director who would say, "Great, you must know about sports. You're a referee and an umpire. I'll hire you." And that's exactly what happened. I got it.
It shocks me for this reason. People talk about 3D chess. You know, that's the political thing about
Right.
3D chess, right? Because 3D chess is you're moving 6 moves ahead, you know? And I don't know if you're aware of it. If you were, you are, and just the feeling I get is you're so darn self-aware. But you've been blessed with this ability to play 3D chess. I'm going to make this move, this move, this move, and a year down the road from now, this is where it's going to pay off because I know there's got to be somebody who's looking another way. And when they look the other way, that's where I'm going to be. I mean, when I studied your story, that's what I was always shocked and amazed by. And I don't know if I've ever talked to anyone who really put all the Lego pieces together and said, no, trust me, when I get done, it'll be a bridge. When I get done.
I'd like to tell you it was
now.
simple. And I would like to tell you that I always felt it was going to work out. But, you have to understand too, here I am, I'm a woman in the 1979, 8 is when I called my first hockey game. So 1979, that spring was when I started training to be a baseball umpire. There weren't women baseball umpires. They thought I was insane too. I took 2 very strange areas for a woman to work in and decided to insert myself into it. I'll never forget my first umpire class, which was run by a former Washington, D.C. Cop. He was like a central casting umpire. I mean, and just picture it. And I called and I said, I would like to join your umpire class that's starting in a week. And he said, so you want to be an umpire, huh, sweetheart? I said, yes, I do. And he said, all right. I went to that first meeting and he was so raunchy and disgusting. He said every kind of swear word, every misogynistic kind of anti-women thing. And I knew what he was doing. He was trying to run me off. But here's the deal. I was sort of laughing inside because I lived in a girls' dorm for 4 years. Women are far worse than men in the things they say. So nothing he said upset me. And when I didn't bail, he became one of my biggest supporters. And I will be forever grateful to him because he had my back. But I ended up, even though I did my 5 years, I got my job in TV. I worked for 5 TV stations, but I never quit officiating. I got hooked on this weird avocation that is a very strange avocation when you consider how people treat us. I didn't retire from officiating till 2019. I officiated for 40 years. And you know what? I don't miss TV. I don't miss teaching, but I miss Friday night football. I really do. I loved officiating, even though even 40 years later, some men wouldn't work with me. Some coaches wouldn't have me on their field, but there were plenty of people who would. And honestly, now, are you a football fan?
Oh, Lord, yes.
Okay, here's a question. How many
Okay.
referees on a football field?
How many referees? Yeah, the side judge, the line judge, the umpire, the referee. So I'm going to go. What's a crew of 5, 6?
I'm gonna give you a hint.
Okay.
It's the same answer whether it's Pop Warner or the NFL.
1, 2, 3, 4.
There's only
How,
one.
how
And
many
you said it,
referees?
the referee.
Yeah,
Now, the
the referee.
is the white hat, the one who says,
Uh-huh.
I have holding, 76 offense. That's a 10-yard
Uh-huh.
penalty, right? That's the referee. So my first 14 years as an official, I'm a wing. I'm a side judge, a head linesman, something like that. And every year I got thrown off crews because the men would say, we're never going to get the state championship with you on our crew because you're a girl, right? So I got mad and I'm like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. So I'm in Arizona and we have our opening meeting every year for football officials. There are 300 officials in the room. I'm the only woman. And a few women showed up. Eventually there were a few, but I think at that time I was the only one. And they said, okay, anybody who wants to start a crew this year, wants to be a referee, stand up. And when the meeting ends, go stand over there in the corner. And if anybody wants to work with them, go over. I stood up in the meeting. I decided I didn't want anybody throwing me off crews anymore. I was going to be my own referee. And I stood up and I said, you want to work with me? You know what you're going to get. You're never going to get the state championship. Some men will be crappy. But anybody who came up to work with me would understand what they were dealing with. And I ended up having some guys on my crew for 12, 13 years. We were a family. And that is what I'd missed out on as a kid. I never was on a team. And so being on a crew, on a football crew, is like being on a team. And these were men who understood I was in charge. And the bottom line is when the referee steps on the field, they become the person in charge. I liked that. That was fun. But anyway, I do miss that desperately.
Well, and you're right. It takes a certain breed of human.
Yes.
And even with your children, because mine, I have 12 and 14-year-old, right? Because I'm optimistic. And going through the entire thing, we're getting my son is playing tackle football for the first time ever. And my youngest is still playing basketball and everything else. And you have to pull them aside because it's human nature for them to go, oh, they got all the calls wrong.
Oh.
And I have to sit back with them and go, no, buddy, they don't care who wins or loses.
Thank you.
And
we don't care who wins.
They just want it to be done right. And are they going to miss a call?
And safe.
Yeah, they're going to miss a call, bud. And they miss calls for you too. And they miss calls against you.
Sometimes you don't make that basket. Sometimes you drop the pass. Sometimes the coach puts in a wrong play. We all do that. Uh-huh. There is not an official anywhere unless some horrible one is gambling on their games. We don't care who wins. And honestly, even at the high school level, they're filming us. Yeah. Right? So people are looking at my game tape and saying, why did you do that? I'm being rated. I get observed. Okay. I don't want to make a mistake. Do I? Yes, I've made mistakes. And I learned later in my career, coaches would scream and yell and throw their clipboards or whatever. And if I would go over and say, coach, I'm not sure we got that one. We might have missed it, but we're going to do better next time. And then they don't know what to say. They want me to fight with it. And I would go, okay.
Did they ever come up to you when you were proven right later, once they've had a chance to watch film or stuff and go, hey, Annie, I'm sorry.
No, not very often. But I did have coaches come out and say, great to see you again. Your crew does a great job, which brings tears to an official's eyes, trust me, and not just because I'm a girl. It's very rare. But you know what? Sometimes we're tired. I worked all day and now it's 7:00 at night. I've been there 2 hours early for pregame and getting out, checking the field and checking in with both coaches. And I'm tired by then. I'm tired. I'm going to get home. And then if there's something goes wrong in the field, I've got to do the secretarial work. I've got to fill out the game reports and say who got tossed and why. And then my boss might call me the next day and go, why did you do that? Right. So it's not a simple thing. On top of that, we started training in June, maybe. We had to go to clinics. We watched film. We took national exams every year, and I had to get a 90 or above every year. The coaches didn't have to take a test, yet they know the rules better than I do. So it's a little frustrating, but those of us who stayed in it for decades found joy in it somehow. And I'm not going to tell you sometimes it didn't really suck. I mean, I've had a police escort to my car more than once. I've had my tire knifed. I've had people pretty much spit on me. I had a guy chase me to my car because I called a game on account of lightning. And I'm standing in front of a backstop with a kid holding a metal bat, right? And there's lightning swirling around us. He goes, I've never seen anyone get struck by lightning. And I said, and I never want to see anyone get struck by lightning. And he basically said it was because I was a woman and I was afraid. I'm like, no, I'd like your child to grow up.
That is the worst part of this. And as a parent who've gone through this, because these are my only children. So I was later in life before I did the parental thing. And I'm glad of it because it gave me a chance to really look at it. I look at some of these parents as childlike too, because I'm older than them by sometimes a good margin. And it's the parental stuff that drives you crazy. Every now and then you'll get really bad coaches. And I've seen that. My son played club soccer. I remember we played one team who was just horrific, and the coach ended up getting thrown out of the game and was just horrific. But mainly it's the parents, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's and I'm like, from your side, I'm just saying in the stands, it's the parents.
And it's so hard. The kids are embarrassed. I don't think the parents understand how embarrassing their behavior is to kids. And the other thing that I find really sad is that some of these kids are playing because their parents want them to, not because they want to. And it's because dad got cut from the JV team in high school. So his kid's going to prove that, there's baseball DNA in the family. This is so wrong. Okay, sports are brilliant for kids. But let me say, all extracurricular activities like theater and music, they all provide the same opportunities. Do something where you're part of a team. Learn punctuality, learn how to follow directions, learn how to follow the rules. Okay. These are life skills. Honestly, I've told my kids, I used to teach resume writing. I'm like, you put that you played on a team. I don't care what level it is. And you didn't have to win a state championship and you could have been the kid on the end of the bench, but you know how to get to practice on time. You know how to work with your teammates. And these are skills that business leaders want. And some people say, well, I never forget, somebody chased me off the field one night angry because their team lost. And this woman said, I can't believe it. My child has never been on a losing team before. And I said, I'm so sorry. That's too bad. I said, they need to learn to win and lose gracefully, both ways. And I'll tell you who I'm more impressed with. I am not impressed necessarily with the kid who catches the touchdown pass that wins the state championship. I'm impressed with the kid who drops that ball and then ends up back at practice early to get better. That's the kid I'd hire. We don't learn anything from success. We learn from failure. Let's let the kids go out there and fail. And that means mom and dad, don't call the coach and say your kid should be starting, or the director of the play and say my child should have gotten the lead. Let your kid gut it out. Maybe they'll be better next year. Maybe they'll get the lead in the play next year. Please, let the kids stand up on their own. And there's too much of this today where kids get out of high school, they go to college and they freak out because mommy and daddy aren't there to defend all their fight all their battles for them. That's what sports are for. That's what extracurricular activities are for. You're not always going to get what you want, so try harder. Maybe you will the next time.
Oh, you have to learn to compete. I explained this to my sons because, I wasn't a sports guy, but I was in theater and I was in music.
Me too.
And my son was like, well, what's that? I'm like, you've never seen anything more competitive than music in your life. And I do country music right now. I've been doing country music as far as being on radio for a long time. And I've got to know all of these acts. And who we have an influx of singers now with a background in baseball. Get the true story.
But it's participation. And honestly, people always expect me to say, oh, sports are the end all and be all. It's anything that you do where you put yourself out there and you put yourself in the spotlight. And sometimes you have a bad night, like officials. Sometimes we have a bad night.
And it's the competitive nature too.
We need to do these things. And way too many parents have this idea that their, little Johnny's going to be a professional baseball player. And so, they insist that the coach doesn't know what they're doing and the kid should be the starting pitcher or whatever. And then they make the kid play all year. Travel teams. This is absurd. Kids should be well-rounded because, matter of fact, I wrote a blog about Tua recently about how he needs to retire after the concussions. Right. And because the bottom line is everybody's sports career is going to end. All of them. After high school, most people never compete in a sport again, never play a team sport again. I have found over the course of my life that I had to quit some of the things I did. I broke my back, had to stop skiing. Okay. I don't skate anymore. I had to stop football because I couldn't get out of the way and I didn't want to break any more bones. So the bottom line is all of our careers are going to end and you have to have something else. And if you have your child playing baseball from the time they're 6 and all they do is play baseball year round because you want them to be pros and they break their arm or break a leg and they can't play anymore, what are they going to do? Whereas if they took some time to be in theater, that's an interest, or, debate club or some other things. You cannot take children and just funnel them into one activity. I think that's child abuse, personally. I grew up in a time when kids would play 3 sports and maybe be in the orchestra. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, listen, I was in the band, but I played basketball too. And we played baseball, but they discontinued our program because we had no money. But the trend is, because I have a high schooler, they're looking now for the athletes who do more than one thing because they're coachable. So. They're coachable. That's what when you've played one thing all your life, you've even at the age of 14, 15, 16, that's what you do. This is what I do. And when you have different sports, I had a coach telling me this. He goes, your brain is more open to, I could do this, or I could take it this way.
What happened to cross training?
Yeah, and your body.
Remember when the football coach wanted the kids to go out for the track team or wrestling? You wanted. Now, that's great, but again, I still push different things. Go take guitar. Go. The school I taught in was inner city, Title I. Most of the kids lived in poverty, but we had great programs. You want to learn to play the piano? Great. We had a lot of options. And I am upset with parents who, as I said, funnel kids into one option. Because you know what? You could have a kid who could be a concert pianist, but if they never touch a piano, how would we know? Mm-hmm. Same way, maybe you'd be a great football player. If you never touch a football, we wouldn't know that. So kids need to branch out, and high school is the time to do that. Because quite honestly, once you become an adult, most adults don't try new things. I don't know why they get embarrassed, like I'll fail. And I think you have to keep doing things. Like about a year ago, I decided to take improv. I took a couple of classes of improv. It was terrifying, but it was fun, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm 69 years old. I'm going to go take improv. And I think as adults, we forget to keep trying new things. And because most people out of high school, they don't do anything new.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's very sad because life offers us a whole bunch of opportunities and we get stuck in our ways. And if parents and teachers don't encourage kids in school to branch out and try new things, shame on them.
You are the epitome of trying new things.
At Reed Animal Hospital, they treat your pet as if it was their own. Now, I'm a very satisfied customer. I can tell you they mean that. It's not a chain. It truly is about helping you and your pet enjoy life together. Dr. David Reed and his entire staff take the time to get to know you and your pet. I can tell you what I like. He's helped me better understand what my dog Luna needs and how I can take care of her more efficiently and kindly. Find them online at reedanimalhospital.com. 2 locations, Saratoga and Campbell. Little secret from me to you, Dr. Reed actually gives you his cell number so he can answer your questions and concerns. They really are committed to you and your pet. reedanimalhospital.com. We all want a better life. And what's the most valuable thing we have? Our health, right? Are you ready to make that a priority? My friend Candy Woodring shared the Tranol product line with me. Tranol is French for change life, and that's their goal. They offer products you've been curious about, like Activate, the GLP-1 line that helps curb appetite, the Enrich supplement that helps your body be more efficient in the use of food. What sets their products apart is they're all certified, backed by research, all natural, gluten-free with no oil or other chemicals. As Candy says, what do you have to lose? Try the product. Email her at the link below, and she will reimburse your shipping cost and will work to make sure you're 100% satisfied. Change your life by clicking the link below.
And I knew we were going on rabbit holes. That's what I love about talking to people like you, because I love rabbit holes. I love going down different places and finding conversations. And we haven't even got around, right? This all started about your career as a sports reporter and how you got into it and how you branched out and you looked for these different ways of doing things. Okay, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get to your books and I want to get to all this stuff that you do, and I want to go down the history rabbit hole with you too. But to sit back and not pay attention to ESPN because it is an iconic brand now. But when you joined in the '90s, okay, because I also want to get to stuff now as far as just one touch on the refereeing thing and women in sports. How gratifying is it for you to see females on NFL crews?
Oh, fabulous. You know what? Officiating is hard, but it's not brain surgery. It should not have taken this long. And look at
Amen.
Major League Baseball. There's no women. There's
Not
no
yet.
women.
We still don't have one, and I don't understand that.
I don't either, because they act like it's such a big deal. Yeah, it offends me. And I will say this about, people say, oh, isn't sportscasting better for women? Quite frankly, no, it's not. And I'll tell you why. When I was a sportscaster, every city had 3 stations, NBC, CBS, ABC, and maybe a local station. And each one of those had 3 positions for sportscasters. That's it. There were like 9 of us in a big city. And the bottom line is today, there are thousands of outlets that broadcast sports at all levels. And what job do they give women? Do you know the job they give women in sports
sideline
broadcasting?
reporters.
Sideline reporting. It was invented, I believe, so that the networks could say, aren't we great? We put women on the team. But you don't need a sportscaster on the sideline. You need nurses. You need the nurses in their scrubs. And because 9 times out of 10, they go, yeah, Bob, I think he sprained his ACL. They don't talk about the game. They talk about injuries. So let's put some nurses down there. That would make more sense. You tell me why we're approaching 2025. We have a tiny handful of women who can call play-by-play or color. Again, not brain surgery. Women can do this, and yet they're not offering that. So I don't think sportscasting's really moved very quickly in regard to women.
Yeah, amen. And it is getting the fact that it is more, right? I mean, because when you and I were growing up, I remember when Phyllis George went on the CBS pregame.
She was Miss America
Right.
in her fur coat.
Exactly right. But it was like, and it was like, did you really get an idea that she knew anything about football? No. When I sit
she
back and I
interviewed the
watch,
coaches' wives, and that's not her fault. They did that to her.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm saying, when you do see women today, when you see women on SportsCenter, when you see women hosting stuff, I never question their knowledge anymore.
Oh, a lot of people do. And let me tell you something.
You're always going to have that. And then you're 28, they're going to have that.
And when I was at ESPN, they hired me and any other women because pretty much the government said they had to.
Yeah.
You can't have an entire newsroom of men. That's how I got in most of the TV stations, because they realized what they were doing. They had entire newsrooms of men in both news and sports. Sports was, integrated later, but it was just something they felt they had to do. And as far as ESPN, they didn't like us. There were a couple of us there. We were never there at the same time. So there was always, one woman in the newsroom. And I wanted to think they hired me because I knew what I was doing. Okay, my boss did tell me he hired me because I was a good writer, which shocked the hell out of me. I'm dyslexic, which I didn't find out till I was in my 50s. So I'm like, I'm a good writer? Who knew? But anyway, I came in with a great deal of sports knowledge from being an official. And I will give you one example. Okay. I was live on the set one night doing SportsCenter, and if you're lucky, usually we got to see the highlights before we went on. So a production assistant would hand you some highlights, you'd rewrite them in the way you spoke, and we all have a style. And then you had already seen them, but sometimes the games ended late. So this game ends late, and this kid comes sliding into the Sports Center desk and throws some highlights on the desk. The red light comes on. I go, oh, well, we're going to go to Wrigley Field, where a fan has just been hit with a foul tip. And this guy's smashed in the head, right? I knew that was a mistake. I knew
Foul
it was a
tip?
mistake. Yes, it was. I'll explain.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I know what a foul tip is.
Yeah, this is the problem. I did all the highlights. I knew it was wrong and I was angry. But after Sports Center, we all go and sit in a conference room and have what's called a postmortem, where we discuss what went well, what went wrong, and what can we do better. So I raised my hand and I said, Rich, and I pointed at the production assistant. This is a 21-year-old just out of college, never had a job, right? They all want to work at ESPN. They're like slave labor, literally. And I said, I need to explain that first highlight was wrong. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, well, a foul tip is a ball that goes from the bat to the catcher's glove and is caught. It's a strike. It's a live ball. A foul ball goes out of play. It's a dead ball. He goes, well, what's the problem? I said, well, if a guy's stealing home and it's a foul ball, I got to send him back to third. If it's a foul tip, he has a right to try to score. And there's silence. You got like 12 men who've all worked at Sports Center, and they're staring at me like, what am I talking about? And that kid stood up and he goes, you're nothing but a picky bitch. And I went, no, I'm an umpire. And some people know I'm an umpire, and I'm embarrassed to make a mistake like that, but I didn't have time to correct it. He storms out of the room. No one defended me. No one said they understood what I was talking about. And the next day, my boss called me in and ordered me to apologize to 21-year-old Rich because I hurt his feelings.
Oh, hell no.
Wouldn't you think ESPN would want to get it right?
No.
They didn't. Not for me anyway, because how could they not get that? It's a basic baseball rule for 100 years or however many years baseball's been around. And they didn't understand. Or they didn't want to admit that there was an error. And so I looked like an idiot, and then I got in trouble. And I wasn't angry. I just I didn't raise my voice. I just said two different things: foul ball, foul tip. It matters. No, it didn't.
Many people would tell you they're still catering to the feelings of 20-year-olds, but that's another story altogether. But then it came to an end. And the thing about that I always feared, you and I were joking before we came on. I told you TV was never an option, but I was always intrigued by radio. I love being able to sit in a room and do what I do, but I've always respected television, even though it had this different thing. I was friends with the evening anchor in Albuquerque, right? And we would play racquetball a couple of times a week. And I said, hey, let's go grab lunch. He goes, I can't go grab lunch. I said, why? He goes, Jerry, I have to go home and shower and put on a suit. And I'm like, why? He goes, because people can't see me.
It's a visual medium.
Like this. And he goes, they can see you anyway because they don't see you. And I had never considered that. And I was probably 26 at the time. And it just blew my mind. Because everything is so how do you look thing. And and you address that shelf life I thought was fascinating.
Well, I was shocked, quite honestly, because I'm suddenly pushing 40 and ESPN did not renew my contract. And I had an agent, I'd worked for 4 stations at that point. I'm doing Sports Center every night. I couldn't get a job anywhere. I went back to Phoenix. I did get 2 seasons of working with the Phoenix Suns because I had worked in Phoenix prior to that. And I was their studio host, which was great fun. It was the Charles Barkley years and just a great time. But it was part-time work. And then they moved on and I couldn't get a job. And I was no longer pretty enough to be in front of a camera. And as for a woman, that's a hard pill to swallow. And I couldn't get a job anywhere. And I didn't want to leave Phoenix because that was kind of felt like home to me after all the states I'd lived in. And I tried to get jobs everywhere. And I didn't want to run into anyone I knew because I didn't want them to say, so what are you doing now that you're not on Sports Center? And I remember this new sports bar opened and they were looking for a bartender. And when I was in DC, I worked 5 years in a bar and I was a server and a bartender. And so I went barging in there and I went to the manager. I said, hey, look, I can entertain your patrons, whether they're sober or not. I can talk sports with them all night and I can make a hell of a cocktail. And And he looked me up and down like I was a piece of meat and said, I don't think so. And I realized he wanted a 20-something in a short skirt and a push-up bra. And I was like, what the hell am I going to do? I was in the middle of a divorce. I was in debt. I couldn't get a job. And I pulled out my officiating equipment. And I went back to officiating Pop Warner football and Little League baseball and high school ball. And I hid behind those uniforms. I did not want anybody to see me because I was embarrassed. And I thought, poor me, poor me, poor me. And I was a jerk. I learned. I accidentally ran into a man. I was sent out to umpire a baseball game one day, and there was a man there, never met him before. His name was Don, and he limped profoundly. It turns out he was a Vietnam veteran. And Don and I ended up becoming baseball partners for 5 years. And Don had 8 kids, and he had Agent Orange poisoning and post-traumatic stress. But on the field, all of that went away for him. Somehow between the white lines, he could adjust. He would be fine. And I don't know if you've ever watched little kids, high school baseball. We dress out of the back of our cars. We have folding chairs, And so I spent hours with Don, and I bitched the whole time. I'm getting divorced. I have no money. I don't want to meet anybody I know from TV. I'm so humiliated, all this. And he never complained about anything. But he told me stories about Vietnam. And were harrowing stories. This man was a war hero, shot, and his family buried him in an empty coffin because he was missing it was a mess. And he never complained. And I did all the complaining. And I started to realize that I was a jerk, that I was worried about stuff that was not the least bit important in the grand scheme. And at the same time, other people were trying to tell me to go back to school to be a teacher. I didn't want to be a teacher. I want to be on TV. And finally, I had to do something. So I did go back to college. I got my teaching degree. And my first job and only job in teaching was in a Title I school where 75% of the kids lived in poverty. And I went in hard ass. I've been in TV, I'm going to whip you guys into shape, because we had a TV station and a newspaper and a radio station with a communications magnet. And I was a hard ass. And my first year, the kids are in class. They didn't do their work, never on time. And I read them the Riot Act one day. And this little girl stood up in the middle of class. She goes, we don't like you at all. And we don't need you. And every kid in that class walked out.
Wow.
I'm standing in front of an empty classroom. And I cried. And I don't cry a whole lot, not in public. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I was just trying to prepare them for life, right? And another teacher came in and said, there, it'll be okay. I'm like, no, it won't. And another teacher took me aside a few days later, and she sat me down and she goes, have you ever considered being nicer? I'm like, what do you mean nicer? There's no nice in a newsroom. There's no nice on the football field. What do you mean nicer? She said, they're kids. And they're kids that they have a lot of problems. And I went, yeah, right, fine. And a short time after that, I had a young man who was late every day to my class, first period, late every day. I took him outside and I read him the Riot Act about how he's never going to be successful. If he can't be punctual, he's never going to hold a job, blah, blah, blah. And he's looking at his shoes. He's like 14. And he goes, I'm so sorry, Miss Montgomery, but I slept on my uncle's couch last night and I didn't understand the bus system and I never know where I'm sleeping. And I said, excuse me? And he was homeless. This child was homeless. And this light bulb went off in my head. I went, I need to be nicer, because I didn't grow up in a world where I had to worry about if I had food or if I had a parent shooting up in the next room, or a gang was going to mug me on my way to school, or I'm pregnant at 15. I didn't grow up in that world. Or we had 400 foster kids in my school. So I realized that I cared about all the things that weren't important, and that nice matters. And now I'm going to tell you right now, if you polled 20 of my former students, some would love me, some would hate me. I'm not telling you that I didn't hold them to high standards. I just tried to understand if homework was more important than being hungry. If you didn't eat, maybe homework wasn't a big deal to you. If you slept, underneath the stadium on the football field, clearly, maybe I shouldn't be too hard on you. Or you haven't had a shower in a week because your family got evicted. I had to adjust my train of thought and readjust and understand what was important. And it changed me completely.
I think any of those kids don't mind you holding them to high standards, especially if they know you do it because you care.
Oh,
Right?
I'd like to tell you suddenly overnight I was real nice and everybody loved me, but it didn't quite work that way. But I tried and I tried to change. And, when I first became a teacher, I thought, oh, I'll get right back into TV. And 1 year went by and 2 years went by, 20 years went by. And by then I didn't care about TV anymore. Um, and it's funny, life, you can plan your life. It never goes the way you're planned. And zigs and zags on you in a bunch of different ways. And now I understand that you need to take the zigs and the zags and go with them because sometimes things work out for the best. I know that sounds rather cliched, but an example to me is that I couldn't have any biological children. And that upset me for a long time. And life is funny. At the end of the school year, I used to put my phone number on the board because I worried about the kids over 10 weeks in the summer. They didn't have food. Who knows where they were sleeping? And I would worry. I said, so if you find yourself you're in trouble and you don't know what to do, call me and I'll help if I can. And some of the kids would write my number down. Not all of them, but some did. And one summer, this 14-year-old kid called me. He wouldn't tell me what was wrong. He just said, he just wanted to talk to somebody. So we'd talk about, silly things. And I said, I'd put you in my class. I'm going to put you in the newspaper class. He said, great, I'll see you when school starts. And when school starts, he wasn't there. And I called him back. The number was disconnected. And I was upset because I didn't know what had happened to him. And a couple weeks later, he called me again. And he goes, Miss Montgomery, I'm hungry. I said, what do you mean you're hungry? He said, well, they put me in foster care and they lock up the food in the morning. And the new school I go to doesn't have my paperwork, so they won't feed me lunch. I'm pissed. I said, can I reach you at this number? Yes. Hung up. I'm swearing up a storm like a sailor. There were no kids in my room. And that teacher who told me to be nice comes in. She goes, what's wrong? And I told her. And she said, well, if it bothers you so much, call foster care and say he can come and live with you. I said, don't be absurd. I'm 55 years old. I've never had any children. I'm not a mom. She said, then quit complaining. I called foster care. I now have 4 kids and I'm a grandma. I have a 7-year-old grandson named Adrian. The kids are in their 20s. They still call me mom. So life is very funny. If I'd not gotten thrown out of TV, not gotten forced into teaching, I wouldn't be a mom.
Well, and that's the thing that I've found as I have gone through this journey in life. You don't realize when you're in the midst of going through it, that it's preparing you for the ultimate outcome.
Yeah.
Right? That you had to go through all of that. You had to go through that discrimination. You had to go through that determination. You had to go through the getting yelled at when it's not your fault when you're a referee. When you had to learn that, okay, well, now things didn't go my way. Now what am I going to do? And all those people who came into your life and said, do something about it. And everything, when you say you didn't magically change.
No,
Yeah,
it
you
wasn't.
did. You may not have acted, but you started caring from that moment on, from that second on. You started caring. You did because look at your life. I always tell my kids, it's the empirical evidence. It's not what you think. Let's look at what we know. Matter of fact, that's why I call this podcast, Here's What We Know, because that's my kids are so tired of hearing it because that's what I tell them. No, it's not what you think. Here's what we know. And what we know is the person you became. That you have 4 kids and a grandchild. And everything that went against you at the time was gently shaping you and putting you right where you needed to be at the right time where you could do that. And then you could go, I'm not gonna referee any games anymore. I'm gonna write because the 50-year-old with dyslexia is gonna be a writer and a damn good one at that. It's amazing the story that you have put together. And I think honestly, you should take a look at it more than you do because it is astounding. That's what I meant when I said 3D chess. I wasn't meaning it was easy. 3D chess is not supposed to be easy. But the fact that you could always look ahead and go, this needs to happen. And when I started the podcast by saying you were a pioneer, I wasn't talking about just ESPN. I was talking about your entire life. Your entire life, you've been a pioneer. You've never not been a pioneer. You don't know how to not be one.
You're going to make me cry now.
Huh?
You could have
Well,
made me cry.
but it's the truth. It's the truth. You've done that. That's what your children love about you. That's what your grandchild is going to grow up going, women can do anything. Look at my
That's what I
grandma.
always hoped when kids would see me officiate. That when they grow up,
Exactly.
what's a big deal? I had a woman official when I was 12. Who cares?
And that's one of the things. And again, I'm not fostering my religion, but I'll share a story with you in this. Is that there's this premise that when you finally make it to heaven, one of the things that you will totally be thrilled about are all the people that you affected and you never knew. And in my opinion, yours are going to be in the thousands, if not the tens of thousands. And it's going to shock you. And you're going to be, I never knew. Yeah, you didn't know, but you did. You did. And that's the cool part. That's the stuff when you go, when I was so excited about talking to you, because I was excited about your life. ESPN, yay, whatever. But your life is amazing.
Again, not all planned. You just kind of have to roll with it. I think we all believe that we can dictate what our lives will look like, but we can't. We can't. If you had told me when I was 25 I was going to end up a teacher and a mom, I would have said you're out of your mind. But life, I think we need to try to hold on to the changes and not be so afraid of them. One of the few things I regret is the couple of years I wasted feeling sorry for me and hiding from people. I'm like, that was so silly. And I'm grateful for the people I've run into that kind of casually, gently pointed me in a different direction. Don, who is deceased now, he died at 60. I miss him, my baseball partner. And the teachers that kind of said, okay, let's be different. And my kids. I mean, I like to tell you being a foster parent was easy. It's not.
It's got to be the hardest thing in the world.
It
really
because
has.
they all
because
come
you're
with terrible
with baggage. With damaged goods, and that you have to walk that tightrope. I've known foster parents, good ones. There's some horrible ones, but the good ones are worth their weight in gold because they understand that they're walking this tightrope with this very
and it's
damaged individual. And when I say damaged, I don't mean weird or criminal or anything. I'm saying
they've
the
lived
psyche
through
that they've
horrendous
gone
experiences. Horrendous experiences. And, my youngest son is autistic, slightly autistic. He's not horribly autistic, but enough to be awkward when he was young. And everybody said he'd never be anything. And he graduated from high school. And then he graduated from Arizona State University. And now he works for the Veterans Administration as a dietitian.
Wow.
Nutritionist. He's a nutritionist. So he helps decide what the patient should be eating. He works at the Phoenix VA. And he climbs mountains, and we're scuba divers, and he's my only son who scuba dives. And all these people that said he'd be nothing. And when he graduated from college, I said, honey, what do you want on your cake? And he said, Mom, I want you to put one of the 3%. And what he meant was only 3% of kids who've ever been in foster care graduate from college. So it said, congratulations, Troy, one of the 3%. And I couldn't be more proud of him. I'm proud of all of them. But for him, and autism doesn't go away. He's still, he's just him. But he's out there in the world. He's my only kid who's a rock collector like me. So we belong to the the Mineralogical Society of Arizona. We go on rock trips with other people. And he is holding on to life and participating in things. And his biological family said that he should apply for disability because he'd never be anything. Wow. So I'm like, no.
I have to say the rock climbing just sounds weird because it just
not
rock climbing, rock collecting. Because it should be rock climbing. Rock collecting seems way too tame for you, Annie. Way too tame.
Don't get me wrong. We climb mountains and stuff to get rocks. But, people make fun of me. I live in Arizona part of the time, and that's like the only reason anyone stopped there before air conditioning was gold, silver, and copper. Okay, so we have 100,000 abandoned mines, and rock collecting is a huge hobby. I literally have 400 specimens just in my living room. So, and none of my other kids, my oldest son brings his little boy, and he'll go rocking with us just to get out in nature, because I love wilderness areas. So he'll come, but he's not really a rocker. My youngest son is. So when I die, it's the one thing he gets that everybody else doesn't. He gets the rock collection.
Well, I've run out of time because I promised you I'd only do an hour, and that's what I try to keep to that area. But the historical fiction, you guys, I haven't had a chance to read your what is it? Your children, your son, the latest one,
Your
the last
Forgotten
one,
Sons.
Your Forgotten Son.
Right. That
That's
came
what
out
I'm
in
talking about.
June. That came out the 80th anniversary of D-Day because it's a
So I
World War
haven't had a
II.
chance, but just to give you a quick synopsis, well, you give the quick synopsis because tell me just how this came about because I won't
Okay.
spoil the book, but it's fascinating.
Quickly, one of my best friend was facing a horrible surgery that was possibly going to leave her paralyzed from the waist down. She asked me to go to Johns Hopkins Hospital to be her healthcare power of attorney. And the night before the surgery, she handed me an envelope of a Ziploc bag full of 75-year-old letters from her Uncle Bud, who did not come home from World War II. And she said, no matter what happens to me, I want you to tell Bud's story. And because I wanted her to feel better, I went, sure, of course. And she walked out of the hospital. She's fine. But I'd made that promise. And Bud was drafted into World War II, like millions of other young men, and he was placed in the Graves Registration Service. And those were the guys that did the worst job in the military. They located, identified, and buried the dead. So he was at D-Day. That day, 10,000 people died, both Allies and Germans. They had to be picked up. The parts had to be gathered. They had to be identified and buried. And when you go to Normandy today, they built that cemetery. And so it's about his being in World War II and how these men have never gotten any credit for anything they did. They are ignored. You watch a World War II movie, you see planes fall from the skies and guys shoot each other. You read a World War II novel, it's battles and they move on to the next page. Nobody ever sticks around to see what happens after the battle. And Bud was at Normandy. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. He was with Patton in Czechoslovakia. And his letters, you could tell from reading his letters what was happening to him. So I told Bud's story through those letters and through family stories. And I've written 6 traditionally published novels. This was the most difficult I've ever written. But I do write about difficult subjects. Funny, people say, do you write about sports? No, I don't write any about sports. I write about societal issues, children in religious cults, post-traumatic stress, domestic violence, child abuse.
Train wrecks.
Yeah, train wrecks. Yeah, domestic terrorism and environmental issues. So I write about all those kinds of things. And many of those subjects were inspired by teaching where I did my students.
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to have to ask you to come back and do another episode with me because what I really want to do is go down the teaching route.
Okay.
Right? I really want to sit back and talk to you about how you approach journalism today. Hot button issue, hot topic, right? And again, I know you're retired. So
no. I'm a traditional old school journalist. So what's happening today breaks my heart.
So I want to go down that route and get your expertise and the fact that you have a unique perspective because you do have such a varied background and I love the historical fiction novels because it's not just a flight of fancy, right?
Oh no,
it's
inspired by a true story. So that's different than I've written before. I have another historical fiction book, but I just write about what interests me, quite honestly. But this one was a command performance. My friend can be she's like, write the book. Okay, I wrote the book. Good, I did it. But we're in the middle of promotions now and book tours and things. So we're still working.
Know, as well as I do, it's begging for one of those 2-hour documentaries. It's begging.
We're hoping. We are hoping because people keep telling me it's rare to find stories about World War II that haven't been told, and this one hasn't been told.
I'm living here in Silicon Valley, so all you folks over there at Netflix, hey y'all, I'm just saying. This is something you might want to check out. Just saying. And you are a delight. And again, I will let's do this again and go down the thing.
I'd be delighted.
I could talk to you for hours as I think you just discovered. Anne Montgomery, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, Gary. I enjoyed it.